Namaskar, this is Firstpost and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. Chinese President Xi Jinping is in Paris, his first trip to Europe since the Wuhan virus pandemic. He was greeted by Tibetan protesters and, of course, the French president. We'll tell you what's on the agenda, which other cities are on his itinerary, why are these destinations significant, and what does Xi Jinping hope to achieve. Meanwhile, in Gaza, hopes of a ceasefire fade as people are evacuated from Rafah. Israel has banned Al Jazeera. We'll discuss. Russia is set to conduct nuclear drills. What does it mean? America has a new weapon, an AI-powered F-16 fighter jet. In the UK, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak is on the back foot. His party has suffered a drubbing in local polls. The opposition wants general elections immediately. In the world of music, Taylor Swift has competition from Kim Jong-un. We'll explain. In Chad, they've held an election after 3 years of military rule, but is this the return of democracy? In Kazakhstan, a former minister caught on camera beating his wife to death. The video has caused national uproar. And the story of an orangutan that has healed himself with medicinal plants. It's Monday motivation and the first such recorded case. All this and more coming up. The headlines first. Diplomatic row between Germany and Russia escalates. Berlin recalls its ambassador to Moscow. Germany says Russia targeted members of Chancellor Olaf Scholz's party in a state-sponsored cyber attack. Last week, Berlin had summoned the Russian envoy over this incident. United Nations Atomic Watchdog Chief Rafael Grossi arrives in Iran. In recent years, Tehran has deactivated the monitoring devices at its nuclear facilities and barred UN inspectors. In 2018, the US exited from the landmark Iran nuclear deal. Since then, Tehran has suspended its compliance on nuclear activities. In India, several schools in Ahmedabad received bomb threat emails, but nothing suspicious was found on the premises. Just days ago, more than 100 schools in the national capital region had received similar threats. In both cities, the emails were reportedly sent from the same Russian domain. John Swinney named the head of the Scottish National Party. The veteran politician is said to be the next leader of Scotland. Last week, First Minister Hamza Yusuf had resigned as the leader of the SNP. Swinney faced no challenge as he was the only candidate in the fray. Cannes Film Festival workers threatened to go on strike. They are unhappy over their pay and working conditions. The Cannes Film Festival is due to start in a week's time. The event attracts over 40,000 people every year. It's a big night in Paris because Chinese President Xi Jinping is in town. He last visited Europe in 2019, before the Wuhan virus pandemic. So he's back after a gap of 5 years. And what's on the agenda? Well, this year marks 60 years of diplomatic ties between France and China, so it is pretty symbolic. But beyond that, it's trade and Ukraine. These are the two key issues. Xi landed this morning in the French capital. There was a bit of rain around, but he got a warm welcome from the French Prime Minister. Take a look. It wasn't all good, though. Some Tibetan activists planned a protest against Xi Jinping. As his motorcade passed by, they unveiled a Tibetan flag. So quite an eventful ride, but eventually Xi Jinping reached the Elysee Palace. He was welcomed by French President Emmanuel Macron. Both men shook hands, posed for pictures and headed inside. No major display of warmth, no bear hugs, more of a business-like attitude, which also sums up this trip. Xi Jinping is visiting Europe after a long time, yet he is not stopping at major European capitals. No Berlin, no Brussels, no Rome, just France, Serbia and Hungary. It tells you what his priorities are. Serbia and Hungary are pro-Russian countries, so that's friendly turf for Xi. And France is charting its own course. Macron recently said Europe cannot become America's vassal. So Xi has picked his destinations carefully. Which brings us to the agenda. What are both leaders hoping to achieve here? First, look at Macron. Trade and Ukraine are his top priorities. France is complaining about cheap Chinese electric vehicles. China is complaining about cheap French liquor. Both are sensitive industries. Any tariff or penalty could lead to a trade war. President Macron is worried about that. The trade between France and China is $79 billion, so he does not want to rock the boat.
We are at a turning point in our history, which requires us to face and overcome the structural difficulties which involve economic trade, where the idea of decoupling would be harmful, and we have a responsibility to ensure a level playing field for all.
So Macron doesn't want decoupling. He wants a level playing field. The second issue is Ukraine. China is accused of supplying strategic items to Russia, like semiconductors, dual-use goods, and weapon components. Macron is hoping to change Xi Jinping's position. He wants China to stop helping Russia's war machine. But will Xi Jinping listen? He was positive on China-Europe cooperation, but silent on Ukraine.
The world today has entered a new period of turbulence and change. As two important forces in the world, China and Europe should adhere to their partnership positioning, dialogue and cooperation, deepen strategic communication, enhance mutual strategic trust, gather strategic consensus, carry out strategic cooperation, promote stable and healthy development of China-Europe relations.
Forget his statement. Xi's travel plans tell you his position. He will visit two pro-Russia countries next. He's slated to arrive in Serbia on Tuesday. Do you know what's special about it? On May 7th, in 1999, NATO bombed China's embassy in Belgrade. Tomorrow is the 25th anniversary of that incident, so Xi's message is quite clear. Do not expect climb downs on Ukraine. Then what is he hoping to achieve in Europe? Again, two things. One is to kickstart his economy. Trade between Europe and China is almost $800 billion. It is also stacked in China's favor, $800 billion. So Xi Jinping wants to continue that. He needs the EU market for his products. And secondly, to drive a wedge between Western allies. French President Macron is the perfect candidate for this. He wants Europe to step out of America's shadows, to follow its own policies, and that offers a window to Xi Jinping. But will either side get what they want? Macron is trying really hard. He's hosting a state banquet for the Chinese president, and tomorrow he's got a getaway planned. He will take Xi to the Pyrenees Mountains. Apparently, Macron used to visit this place as a boy, so he's hoping for a personal touch, a more intimate conversation. But honestly, success looks unlikely, mainly because of two reasons. One, the European Union is divided. Today, we saw Macron and Ursula von der Leyen in Paris, but no Olaf Scholz. Apparently, the German Chancellor was busy. He visited China last month and came back empty-handed, so this time he skipped the meeting. Same with Eastern Europe. In Hungary, Xi Jinping is expected to announce a new factory, a BYD plant to make electric vehicles. Do you see the problem here? The EU says Chinese EVs are a problem for them, yet an EU member will soon have a Chinese EV plant. So there is no united front. Secondly, neither side will make concessions. Last year, Macron appeared close to making one. He was in China for an official trip. And there, Macron talked about Taiwan. He said Europe must not get dragged into a confrontation over Taiwan. It was a major climb down. But that was in April last year. More than 1 year has passed. What did Emmanuel Macron get for that concession? Pretty much nothing. So chances are he will not make the same mistake again. Now let's turn our attention to West Asia. Israel is preparing to attack Rafah. Over the weekend, the ceasefire talks hit a dead end, so an escalation now seems unavoidable. In fact, the fighting may have already resumed. There were reports of fresh airstrikes today. The situation is precarious and dangerous. More than 1 million Palestinians are in Rafah. This morning, 100,000 of them were asked to evacuate. The orders came from the Israeli Defense Forces, the IDF. They said their operation will be limited in scope. For now, they're focusing on just a small area in eastern Rafah. So the message from Netanyahu is quite clear. Despite American objections, he's going ahead with a strike. He's also refused the demands from Hamas. He says he will dismantle the group.
But while Israel has shown willingness, Hamas remains entrenched in its extreme positions. First among them, the demand to remove all our forces from the Gaza Strip, end the war, and leave Hamas in power. The state of Israel cannot accept that.
That should explain why there's no ceasefire. Hamas wanted an end to the fighting. Israel rejected that. They were open to just a temporary pause, a small window where Israel could secure the release of hostages. 130 Israeli hostages are still in Gaza. Their fate now hangs in the balance. Also that of 1 million Palestinians who are in Rafah. If Israel launches a full-blown attack, these people will have nowhere to go. And this is not a hypothetical scenario anymore. Listen to what Israel's defense minister has said.
We identified alarming signs that Hamas actually does not intend to go to any agreement with us. This means we will start military actions in Rafah and the entire Gaza Strip in the very near future.
So Israel could start a full operation soon. Defense Minister Gallant has ruled out any negotiation or ceasefire, at least in the immediate future. And Israel has been warning about this for months now. Netanyahu says Rafah is the last bastion of Hamas. In March, Israel said there are thousands of Hamas fighters in Rafah. The IDF wants to neutralize them, but the United Nations is warning against such an operation.
We are looking at, if this happens, both what the Emergency Relief Coordinator has warned about could be a slaughter of civilians.
A slaughter of civilians, says the United Nations. So far, their appeals have fallen on deaf ears. Israel is determined to carry out the Rafah operation. But it won't be an easy one. Netanyahu faces three big challenges. The first one has to do with the operation itself. To locate these Hamas fighters. Where are they hiding? It's hard to pinpoint the exact location, and that has been the case since the beginning of the war. So Israeli forces are operating in the blind. Netanyahu's second challenge is diplomatic support. His traditional allies are wavering. Western powers no longer back his war in Gaza. The US is working closely with other regional players, trying to revive the peace dialogue. Over the weekend, the CIA director was dispatched to Cairo. His name is William Burns. He's playing the role of an interlocutor. He's been mediating with four key players: Israel, Hamas, Egypt, and Qatar. He's talking to all of them for a ceasefire. And back in Washington, D.C., U.S. President Joe Biden is doing his bit. He hosted the King of Jordan at the White House for an informal meeting. Now, the U.S. and Jordan are longtime allies. They've been discussing the situation in Rafah. Expect them to remain in lockstep in the coming days. A ceasefire may not happen, but the pressure on Netanyahu to end the war will continue. Allies like the US may use military aid as leverage, and that would be Netanyahu's third challenge, securing the supply of arms and ammunition. Does Israel have enough to sustain a long campaign in Rafah? Take a look at this report. Last week, the US was supposed to send a shipment of ammunition to Israel, but Washington put it on hold. And this is unprecedented. The US has never done this before. It has been Israel's biggest military backer. Since the Gaza war began, America has sent a steady supply of military aid to Israel. So why did they stop this shipment? Is there a change in American policy? They haven't said it in so many words, but it is evident that Netanyahu no longer enjoys the same level of support from the US, and this could complicate his advance into Rafah. Meanwhile, the Hamas leadership is still hoping for a truce. 2 of their members will be back in Cairo tomorrow. Egypt has been hosting the talks. Israel has not sent a delegation. They've been communicating indirectly. Earlier today, Biden spoke with Netanyahu on the phone. We don't know what the outcome of that conversation was. As of today, the likelihood of a ceasefire is dim. This war looks set to escalate further before it ends. So Netanyahu is on the offensive, both on the battlefield and off it. His latest target is Al Jazeera, the news channel owned by Qatar. On Sunday, its office in Jerusalem was raided. Israeli officials turned up with a government order. They also took away some equipment. But more importantly, the broadcast has been banned. So you cannot watch Al Jazeera on Israeli cable. Just look at these pictures. If you switch to Al Jazeera, you will see this plate. It says the transmission has been blocked in Israel. But the ban itself is not surprising. Israel's parliament passed a new law last month. It allows the government to ban any foreign broadcaster. Just one condition: it must be considered a national security threat. So Prime Minister Netanyahu already had the power. All he needed was the go-ahead. On Sunday, he convened his cabinet members and he had a simple message for them. Al Jazeera is a mouthpiece of Hamas, so it's time to ban them.
Al Jazeera reporters harmed Israel's security and incited against IDF soldiers. It is time to remove the Hamas mouthpiece from our country.
What does this ban mean? Immediately, three things. Al Jazeera's offices are shut, their equipment has been seized, and their broadcast stopped. But on the internet, you can still find Al Jazeera, like on Facebook or YouTube. Those are beyond Israel's regulatory powers, which brings us to Al Jazeera's response. Their bureau chief has criticized the broadcast ban. He says it's a dangerous decision.
It's political things, because at least Prime Minister Netanyahu and his far-right government that he is leading in Israel, they're looking all the time how to have benefits for their base, elected base. This decision is very dangerous one. Israel cannot claim all the time that she's a democracy, that it's democracy, and at the same time they are cutting and prevent the journalists to do their job.
Al Jazeera is a shady customer. Most of their funding comes from the government of Qatar. And who else does Qatar fund? Hamas. So the relations have always been fraught. In 2017, Netanyahu had threatened something similar. He did not like Al Jazeera's coverage of the Al-Aqsa Mosque, so he threatened a ban. But back then, Israeli courts stepped in. We've also seen physical attacks. In 2021, Israeli missiles targeted a building in Gaza. It housed the Al Jazeera offices. In 2022, one of their journalists was killed, Shireen Abu Akleh. She was reporting from the West Bank. Israel says their soldier accidentally fired at Shireen. So my point is quite simple. This ban is not an overnight decision. It's been brewing for years now. The question is, was Netanyahu justified? To answer that, we must consider two factors. Number one, Al Jazeera is not your knight in shining armor. It is not free media. It is state media. No different from, say, CGTN, the Chinese broadcaster. Just look at this opinion piece. It was published right after the Hamas attack. And look at the headline. On October 7th, Gaza broke out of prison. That's what Al Jazeera said, but that's not what happened. Hamas raped and killed hundreds of innocent Israelis. That is not a jailbreak. That is terrorism. And Al Jazeera has made a habit of it. Look at this report from 2019. They published a video peddling Holocaust denial. Let me read the caption for you. The gas chambers killed millions of Jews. So the story says. How true is the Holocaust and how did the Zionists benefit from it? I don't think this qualifies as journalism. It's more of hate speech. So Al Jazeera has a shady track record. Qatar has used them to push their agenda, whether it's anti-Semitism or Holocaust denial, which brings us to factor number two. A ban may not be the answer, especially not in a democracy like Israel. It gives more mileage to Al Jazeera and their coverage. So what have other countries done to such state mouthpieces? Take Russia today, for example. The US asked them to register as a foreign agent, and they did so in 2017. China's CGTN did the same in 2019. So maybe discrediting them is the answer. Of course, Netanyahu's motives are very different here. He could have targeted Al Jazeera whenever he wanted. So why did he do it now? To create a diversion. Netanyahu says Al Jazeera is a terrorist channel, so he's banned it. But how will this affect the war in Gaza? In two ways. One, it will harden public opinion. Press groups are already criticizing Netanyahu, so is the United Nations, which means the ban has further isolated Israel. And second, It could stall the peace talks. Qatar is a key mediator in Gaza. They're working on a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. But after this ban, why would they? Qatari officials talked about this last month. They threatened to walk away from the mediation. And now they have an excuse to do so. And this issue is not limited to Israel. It could become a template for other countries. Today's politics is all about narratives, about building perceptions and images. And who does that best? The news media. So there is constant scrutiny on news coverage, especially by foreign agencies. Just look at India. Foreign Minister Jaishankar targeted Western media recently. He said they considered themselves to be political players in India. But India has not banned them, because banning is often not the solution. It only adds fuel to the fire. Instead, the goal must be to tackle their propaganda, to fight bias with truth. So there's a lesson for everyone here. For the likes of Al Jazeera, it should be a wake-up call. This action is not so much about criticizing Israel, it's about glorifying and defending Hamas. You cannot expect Israel to accept that. At the same time, Netanyahu has far more important things to do. His allies are abandoning him, his people are fed up with him, and his war has killed tens of thousands of people. Yet what does he do? Go after a news channel. It's a diversionary tactic, and one that could backfire. If you look at headlines from the last 2 years, you'll see a pattern. Two words often appear together: Russia and nuclear. They make it sound like a nuclear war is imminent. The latest set of headlines say Russia is set to hold a nuclear weapons drill. Does it mean they will fire actual nukes? How dangerous is it? Have others done it? And what is a nuclear drill? Tonight, we'll try to unpack it for you. First things first, Russia says this is in response to Western threats. Threats from the UK, France, and the US. So President Vladimir Putin has ordered nuclear drills. As expected, Ukraine has denounced it. They're calling it nuclear blackmail. But it won't be a first. Moscow has done it before. They've conducted such nuclear drills in the past, including one that was held just 5 days before invading Ukraine. But this drill is going to be a little different because it uses tactical nuclear weapons. This drill is meant to test the readiness of nukes. It involves training, preparation, and deployment. Moscow will simulate the use of nuclear weapons. Which brings us to the question, what are tactical nuclear weapons? And why is Moscow using them? Now, when we think nuclear war, this is what comes to mind. The Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombing. The only time when nuclear weapons were used. The only time ever, thankfully. The bombs were dropped on Japan. They killed 200,000 people and caused widespread destruction. Those bombs were strategic nuclear weapons. They have a larger yield. They can destroy entire cities, as they did in this case. What Moscow is using is very different. Here we are talking about non-strategic nukes, or what's commonly known as tactical nukes. They're smaller, they're less powerful, and they can be used in a battlefield. They can destroy enemy targets without a widespread radioactive fallout. This makes such weapons useful in war. Russia has around 6,000 nuclear warheads. About 2,000 of them are tactical. And there are many ways Moscow can use them, like placing them on missiles or firing them from aircraft and ships. And the purpose of this drill is to test how quickly Russia can deploy these weapons. So does that mean there is a risk? Are we on the brink of a nuclear war? Well, yes and no. Nuclear drills are not new. All major nuclear powers conduct them. But since the Ukraine war, Russia has upped the ante. It's been using these drills as a deterrent. Last year, Russia conducted a nuclear strike drill in October, the first since the invasion of Ukraine. Missiles were launched, and Putin oversaw these drills. He lauded the preparedness of his forces. And NATO responded with its own exercises. There was a lot of rhetoric. But will this lead to an actual nuclear war, or is this just posturing? No side is expected to use strategic nuclear weapons that cause mass destruction, but the use of tactical nukes cannot be ruled out. They can boost efficiency in the battlefield and take out enemy targets. Thankfully, countries have still shied away from doing that. During the Cold War, the US and Soviet Union deployed thousands of tactical nuclear weapons. None of them used it, because the result would be mutual destruction. Will Russia cross that threshold now, is the question. Will they use tactical nukes that won't cause much damage, but send a strong message? And how will NATO respond to that? Despite the tensions, an all-out nuclear war still looks unlikely. For now, the US has only shot a warning, asking Moscow to not use tactical nukes. Joe Biden says it will change the face of war. And for a change, we agree. No one needs a nuclear war. Russia is indulging in some nuclear saber rattling, and it should be left at that. Is a nuclear bomb the ultimate weapon? In the age of artificial intelligence, this question does not have a yes or no answer. And I'll tell you why. The US has recently tested a new type of weapon, an F-16 fighter jet operated by AI. That's right, a fighter jet flown by artificial intelligence instead of a human soldier. So instead of a pilot, it was AI in the cockpit. The technology is still under development, but the US Air Force is betting big on it. They plan to introduce a fleet of AI-enabled fighter jets. The first planes could be inducted as soon as 2028. Our next report brings you more.
It was a sunny afternoon in California. Frank Kendall, the US Air Force Secretary, was a man on a mission. He was supposed to test a special aircraft. From the outside, it looked just like any other fighter jet in the world. But don't let the appearance deceive you. This plane isn't flown by a pilot. Instead, it can be controlled by artificial intelligence, or AI. That's what Secretary Kendall was there to experience. And he wasn't disappointed. The AI-powered plane went head-to-head against a manned F-16 jet. It was a simulated dogfight. The result was unambiguous. The AI outperformed the real pilot. Secretary Kendall, having witnessed the technology firsthand, is now convinced of its potential. He feels confident enough to let AI fire real weapons.
The computer's not going to get tired. It's not scared. It's going to follow its rules and do as close to a perfect maneuver as it can do. Whereas the humans are always going to have some variability in how they perform.
To be clear, AI is not replacing real-life pilots anytime soon. But the US Air Force wants to invest in it, that too in a big way. Their plan is to build an entirely new fleet of aircraft, a total of 1,000 planes, which will be equipped with AI. The first lot could enter service within 4 years. The US Air Force calls this technology VISTA. That's short for Variable In-Flight Simulator Test Aircraft. How does it work? The AI on board the aircraft doesn't have a brain of its own. It relies on data and machine learning to recognize patterns and make decisions.
This aircraft in the X-62 has one purpose, which is to advance the state of machine learning.
Once it's airborne, the aircraft can analyze specific situations and execute both defensive and offensive maneuvers. The technology cannot fully replace the pilot in the cockpit yet, especially in combat situations, but it can assist them, executing specific tasks with greater accuracy, like executing tighter turns, engaging in more risky moves, and helping fire shots with better accuracy. In the case of more routine missions, where human input is not required, the AI can be trusted to fly the aircraft on its own and complete the task at hand. The technology is not perfect yet, but the US clearly has a head start. It is believed to be the only nation with AI-powered planes. America's rivals will accelerate their efforts to catch up if they haven't already, but this breakthrough could mark the beginning of a new arms race, where AI is at the front and center. In the absence of any regulations, this could lead to the birth of new and more dangerous threats, one that our world may not be fully prepared to deal with.
Now let's turn to the UK and their Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. The last few days have been tough for him. Britain held local body elections on May 2nd. These were elections for mayors and district or city councils. They don't directly affect the central government, but they were the last polls before the general election, and so the last chance to gauge public opinion. Now the public opinion is in, And it does not look good for Rishi Sunak. His Conservative Party, also known as the Tories, were hammered. They lost control of 10 local councils. Almost 400 Tory councillors lost their seats. Only one mayor out of the 11 in the UK is from the Conservative Party. The other 10 are all from the main opposition, which is the Labour Party. And this includes the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan. Sadiq Khan won a historic third term as London's mayor. He even increased his vote share, despite being in charge for 8 years.
It's truly an honour to be re-elected for a third term, and to do so with record levels of support from Londoners, with an increased margin of victory.
Sadiq Khan did not win just because of his popularity. The result was also a message, a rejection of the Tories, and this was the case all over the UK, which is why the Labour Party now wants elections immediately.
I think the message here is very, very clear. And I think across the East Midlands, there's been a sending of that message to the government, which is we're fed up with your division, with your chaos, with your failure. 14 years. And I'm sorry, I don't care which political party you support. If you leave your country in a worse state than when you found it 14 years later, you do not deserve to be in government for a moment longer.
That was Keir Starmer, the leader of the Labour Party. He was celebrating all weekend, and he feels he's moments away from becoming Britain's next Prime Minister. So it's no wonder that he doesn't want to wait. The UK is supposed to have general elections in the next few months, by next January at the latest. The exact date has not been fixed. That is up to the current Prime Minister. So Rishi Sunak will decide the date. And after the drubbing his party just received, it is no wonder that he's keen to delay the election. Yes, it seems Sunak was thinking about summer elections, the British summer, so by August. But now he's reportedly delaying the polls to autumn in the UK, which will be after September. He's buying time in the hopes of winning over some voters.
I'm focused completely on the job at hand. That's delivering for people across the country. If you just look at what we're doing in the last week or so alone, a £900 tax cut hitting people's payslips, the first failed asylum seeker off to Rwanda.
Sunak wants to appeal to traditional Tory voters with tax cuts and his flagship anti-immigrant policy. That's the Rwanda deportation plan. The UK is about to start deporting refugees. Rishi Sunak wants to send them to Rwanda in Africa. One person has already left for Rwanda. That was not a deportation, though. It was voluntary. The first deportation flight is supposed to take off in July. If that happens, it may win him some votes, but it won't be enough to win the general election. And Sunak himself knows this. He admitted that his party won't win the next election. He said the Tories will come second. But he hasn't exactly admitted defeat either. Rishi Sunak claims that no one will win outright. He says there will be a hung parliament after the next election, and that seems to be very optimistic, because opinion polls say that Labour is on course for a landslide victory. They're expected to win with a comfortable majority. But you can't fault Sunak for hoping otherwise. He's clearly on the back foot. His colleagues aren't even trying to oust him anymore. They say it's too late to change anything now, so Rishi Sunak has no real hope of victory, and his party looks set to make him the fall guy. How does he plan to get out of this unenviable situation? Guess we'll find out in the weeks ahead. Billionaire pop icon Taylor Swift released her latest album about a fortnight ago. But what she did not expect was competition from an unlikely new music sensation, Kim Jong-un, the dictator of North Korea, who has become a TikTok sensation with his latest propaganda song. It's called Friendly Father. And in a shocking turn of events, it has found a newfound fan among US youngsters. They say that the song is quote-unquote fire. Why is Friendly Father going viral? And does it hold an unfriendly message for the world? Here's a report.
Catchy, isn't it? That was Friendly Father. Just to clarify, we're referring to the name of the song and not the person in the video, who, by the way, isn't all that friendly in real life. He's the dictator of North Korea, Kim Jong-un. Kim released this song about 2 weeks ago. It's the latest propaganda offering by the communist state. It's a synthy electropop song with a music video, which is almost like a bop montage, with Kim kissing a child, Kim being mobbed by giddy women, Kim waving here and Kim waving there. The video also shows a lot of happy people. Doesn't look like a nation suffering one of its worst food shortages in decades, so there's a lot of creativity involved. Except in this scene, which was probably designed by an intern. But that aside, this peppy song has become an unexpected hit on TikTok, especially among Gen Z in the United States. Many people think the song is catchy. Some say it's fire. Others are asking if it's on the music app Spotify. There are memes now. Some claim it sounds better than K-pop songs. Yes, the very same songs that Kim calls vicious cancer. So maybe he would be happy to have one-upped K-pop. But even so, the irony is not lost on us. This is a communist song going viral on a Chinese-owned app in the United States, the country that's trying to ban TikTok. While young Americans love the song, there's no love lost between the two countries. In fact, Kim Jong-un has vowed to quote-unquote thoroughly annihilate the US. Now, many fans are oblivious to the Korean lyrics of the song that are praising the man who has launched dozens of ballistic missiles. The lyrics say, "Let's sing Kim Jong-un, the great leader. Let's brag about Kim Jong-un, our friendly father." We aren't sure about that, but if the Hermit Kingdom must brag, it should be about this song. Because North Korea has created a propaganda hit. In the past 50 years, Pyongyang has released a string of propaganda songs. And it's not alone. Other nations have churned out similar songs. But with Friendly Father, North Korea is winning the jingle warfare. So how did they craft this viral sensation? Well, by keeping things simple. For starters, the song has a catchy tune. It's designed to be accessible. People can pick it up easily and sing along. It's set at a vocal range that most people can follow, so no vocal gymnastics are required. Plus, there's a lively tempo that hides the insidious ideological messages being repeated with every chorus. So the song can be spread through the masses, which it has. Now, that's quite the earworm by a country that has zero tolerance for creative freedom. In Pyongyang, it's illegal for musicians to produce works simply for the sake of art. The question remains, does this pop sensation hold something sinister? After all, this is Kim Jong-un we're talking about. In this song, Kim is being called the Great and Father. These terms were previously reserved for North Korea's first leader and Kim's grandfather, Kim Il-sung. Kim Jong is becoming increasingly aggressive, and not just in terms of song and dance. Over the past year, he has pledged to build up his military arsenal, conducted one ballistic missile strike after another, and has called South Korea public enemy number one. This year, he said that the North would no longer seek reunification with the South. The hope for reunification was part of his grandfather's legacy. Kim Jong-un is keen to solidify his image as the supreme leader. And with Friendly Father going viral, his message, even if not understood, is reaching an unlikely audience. After all, music knows no boundaries, even if it's full of propaganda.
Our next story is from Africa, from the Central African nation of Chad. Chad is holding its presidential election today, and much of the world is watching closely because this is no ordinary election. Chad is going to polls after 3 years of military rule. It is officially transitioning back to a civilian government. Chad is located in what is known as the Sahel region. This region is infamous for its coup d'etats. Almost every country is in the coup belt is under military rule. Chad was among the first. The junta took over in April 2021. This was after the president, Idriss Déby, was killed. Idriss Déby was a coup leader turned president. He took power in 1990 and went on to rule Chad for 31 years. Déby was leading the military against rebels when he was killed. The rebels shot him during their battle. Déby died shortly after that. The military seized power and they installed the president's son, Mahamat Déby, as the transitional president. Now, Déby Jr. has been in charge for the last 3 years, and now he wants to legitimize his rule. He is a candidate in today's presidential election.
This is the commitment I made before God and the Chadian people, that of organizing, in the agreed-upon timeline, elections which will mark a return to constitutional rule.
Deby Jr. was not exactly honest there. The timeline he spoke about was not the original one. When he came to power in 2021, he said he would only stay for 18 months. But in 2022, he extended that deadline. And that is not his only red flag. He also cracked down on protesters. His forces killed between 50 and 300 demonstrators. This was in October 2022 when he extended the junta rule. Mohammad Deby has also cracked down on the opposition in Chad. Dozens of activists have been arrested. Opposition leaders have been barred from the election. Deby's main rival, his cousin Yahya Dillo, was killed on February 28th. Dillo's body was found with a gunshot wound in the head. That happened on the day that Deby announced the election dates. The presidential election is being held today. The provisional results will come on May 21st and the final ones by June 5th. So Deby has a month before the election results are declared. It seems that he has ample time to make sure things go his way. But he may not even need to do that. Presently, Deby's biggest opponent is his Prime Minister, Sukseh Masra. Masra was an opposition leader who fled Chad in 2022, but he returned last year and was made Prime Minister this January. Masra's critics say he's been co-opted by Deby and the military, that he's just a proxy. But despite this, Masra is the biggest challenger for Deby.
I would like to invite every Chadian to get out and vote. All those who have shown that they want massive change to go out en masse and vote en masse in a peaceful manner.
There are rumors of a gentleman's agreement between Deby and Masra that the loser of the election will become Prime Minister and the status quo will be maintained. So knowing all of this, how legitimate do you expect Chad's election to be? Whatever happens, Chad's military junta leader seems set to retain power. He is on the verge of extending his dynasty's 34-year rule. So while it's true that Chad is transitioning back to democracy, the whole exercise looks like a sham. But the world is still watching closely, and many are hoping for Deby to win, many in the so-called democratic West. Because unlike the other coup leaders in Africa, Deby seems to be working with Western powers. He allows them to use his country as a base to fight terrorists in the Sahel. He maintains good ties with France. France has hundreds of soldiers in Chad. The US had troops there as well. They were recently expelled. However, if the West is nice to Deby after the sham election, the American troops could be allowed to return. That could be why the West is not coming down too hard on Deby, why they aren't beating the drum and criticizing a lack of democracy. The West has interest in Chad, and they would not mind if the Deby dynasty continues to reign. To Kazakhstan now, where a CCTV video has led to uproar across the nation. It shows a former minister beating his wife to death. The assault went on for 8 hours. He's currently on trial for his wife's murder. But it's not just any other trial. This high-profile case has changed the way Kazakhstan looks at domestic violence. It has led to solidarity among women, more police vigilance, and new laws against domestic abuse. But will it change the way the Kazakh society deals with violence against women? Our next report explores.
This is Kwandaik Bishimbayev, Kazakhstan's former economy minister, a high-profile businessman, a favorite of former President Nazarbayev. He's on trial right now. Why? For beating his wife Sultanat Nukinova to death. Last November, he and Nukinova were at a restaurant. It was owned by one of his relatives. CCTV footage shows him punching her, kicking her, dragging her by the hair. He then dragged her to a separate room. There were no cameras there. And that's where he beat her to death. The assault went on for 8 hours. When it ended, Bishimbayev called his fortune teller. He assured him that his wife was fine. The ambulance arrived, but 12 hours later. By then, Nukinova was dead. Bishimbayev was charged with killing her. For weeks, he maintained his innocence. But when the CCTV footage surfaced, he could no longer do that. He accepted the crime but said he had unintentionally caused her death. The case has led to a huge uproar in Kazakhstan. Domestic abuse is not uncommon in the country. The UN says there are about 400 cases every year, but the real number is likely to be much higher because many of those cases go unreported. This high-profile trial is different. It's being live-streamed. So this case touched a nerve with the country's women and its silent survivors. There were a lot of attempts to malign Nukenova. The defense said she was hysterical, she drank too much, she provoked her husband, and all of this led to outrage on social media. It started with the hashtag Zasaltanat, meaning for Sultanat. Kazakh women posted photos of themselves holding glasses of wine. They tweeted in solidarity with her. Celebrities joined in, and so did other public figures. In 2017, Kazakhstan decriminalized beatings, as well as other acts causing what it called minor physical damage. It was punishable only by fines or short jail terms. This public uproar made them change that. On April 15th this year, President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev signed a new law. It makes striking women and children a criminal offence that's punishable by jail time. Plus, police will now have to investigate all cases concerning domestic violence, even if the victim did not report it. The new law got some pushback. Male lawmakers rallied against it. One even proposed a special law for men. He argued that men did not have enough rights in the country. Nukenova's case highlights how this new law is crucial, because it's the first step towards ensuring safety for Kazakhstan's women.
Our last story tonight comes as a dose of Monday motivation. Thanks to a primate that played doctor. I'm talking about a wild orangutan in Indonesia. He got injured in a fight, but instead of waiting for help, the wild animal got innovative. He made a paste out of a medicinal plant, applied it to his facial wound, and healed himself. This is the first time a creature in the wild has been recorded treating an injury with a medicinal plant. Where did the orangutan learn this behavior from? Do other animals self-medicate? And what's the lesson for all of us? Here's a report.
This is Rakus, a 35-year-old wild male orangutan. He lives in Indonesia's Gunung Leuser National Park. In 2022, Rakus developed a wound on his face. Researchers believe he was injured fighting with rival male orangutans. But soon after his injury, the orangutan was observed doing something uncanny.
He was observed feeding on this plant for 13 minutes, and then he continued chewing but stopped swallowing and put the plant sap from his mouth precisely onto the wound. And he repeated this behavior for 7 minutes.
And he would keep going back to the same plant. That's when researchers discovered that Rakus was self-medicating. His leaves of choice came from yellow root. This is a medicinal plant. It has anti-inflammatory and antibacterial properties. Yellow root is used by people throughout Southeast Asia. Some even use it to treat diabetes and malaria. Now, Rakus was using this plant to treat his wound. And within 5 days, the wound had closed. Less than a month later, it healed without any signs of infection. This is the first time a wild animal has been observed using a plant to treat a wound, and this is a big deal, for 2 reasons. First, it adds to evidence that humans are not alone in using plants for medicinal purposes, and secondly, because records of animals medicating themselves are rare, especially when it comes to injuries. Now, other animals have been observed healing themselves, but in a different manner, and with less precision. Even so, their abilities are worth appreciation. Animals that are wounded in the wild or stricken by disease have a remarkable ability to treat their injuries. Some call them nature's pharmacists. Apes rub their fur with millipedes that contain insect-killing chemicals. Some birds do the same thing but use ants. Orangutans rub chewed-up leaves to soothe sore muscles. Chimpanzees and gorillas occasionally eat whole leaves to help them expel parasites. And where do animals learn these techniques? There's no one clear answer. Insects as small as caterpillars and ants self-medicate. But when it comes to small-brained animals, this is usually a matter of instinct. while animals like monkeys or sheep acquire skills through experience. It can be almost human-like learning and sharing of expertise. But most of all, scientists say that natural selection is at play. Animals that eat medicinal plants at the right time survive more successfully than animals that don't, which causes this behavior to spread. So, where did Rakus get his ace medical skills from?
He might have learned it from his mother or another orangutan. And we know that orangutans do social learning, so they show peering, which is close distance observation of another. So they sometimes come close 10 to 20 centimeters, watching another, for example, processing and opening a fruit in order probably to learn the mechanism how to do it.
The study of self-medication in animals is still struggling with a lot of unanswered questions, so there is no certainty here, except that Rakus got innovative, healed himself, and gave us a healthy dose of Monday motivation.
And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. In Brazil, massive flooding caused by heavy rain has left over 120,000 people displaced. In France, bakers beat Guinea's record for world's longest baguette. And over 250,000 people across 169 countries take part in the world's biggest run for charity. Finally, we're taking you back in history. On this day in 1937, German airship Hindenburg burst into flames in New Jersey. The fire was attributed to a hydrogen leak from the ship. The accident killed 36 of the 97 people on board. It also ended the use of airships for commercial transportation. We're leaving you on that note. Thanks for watching. We will see you tomorrow.
This Guinness World Records title for the longest baguette.
Firstpost reports from the world's second largest continent. Hello, I'm Alison Lagrange. A very warm welcome from Durban, South Africa. We get you the news and the newsmakers from Africa. South Africa goes to the polls on the 29th of May. I will track the election and bring you ground reports. Is it the end of the road for the African National Congress? And will former President Jacob Zuma stage a dramatic comeback? From elections to climate change to innovations and opportunities. As the world's attention shifts, we report from Africa, the heart of the global South. Join me every weekday live on Firstpost.